I'm hurt. Please leave me alone, she sobbed, her voice barely louder than the rain hammering against the windshield. But Daniel Carter wasn't the kind of man who drove away from pain, especially not when it sounded like that. He had only stopped because he saw her stumble near the old bridge at the edge of town. Her thin sweater soaked through, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold in something far deeper than the cold. At first, he thought it was just another couple arguing. This town had its share. But when he noticed the dark SUV speeding away and her collapsing to her knees, something inside him shifted. Daniel was a single father. For 5 years, it had just been him and his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Since losing his wife, he had learned how fragile life could be, how quickly someone could disappear, how silence after a cry for help could echo forever. So when this stranger looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and whispered for him to leave her alone, every instinct told him that leaving would be the one thing he could never forgive himself for. He stepped closer slowly, careful not to startle her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, removing his jacket and draping it over her shoulders despite her weak protest. Up close, he could see the bruise forming along her temple and the tremble in her fingers that had nothing to do with the rain. She tried to stand but winced sharply, and that was when he saw the blood on her ankle, staining the pavement beneath her. "You need a hospital," he insisted, but she shook her head violently, fear flashing in her eyes at the word. "No hospital. Please. He'll find me." That sentence told Daniel everything he needed to know. Without asking another question, he made a decision that would change both their lives. He helped her into his truck, ignoring her weak resistance, and drove not toward town, but toward his home on the outskirts where no one would think to look. As he drove, she faded in and out of consciousness, murmuring fragments of sentences. Apologies, please, a name she begged not to hear again. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had seen that look before, in the mirror after his wife passed, in Lily's eyes during the first nights without her mother. It was the look of someone who felt trapped. When they reached his small farmhouse, he carried her inside, laid her gently on the couch, and called his neighbor Martha, a retired nurse who had helped him countless times with Lily's scraped knees and fevers. Martha didn't ask questions. She simply arrived with her medical bag and quiet efficiency. "This isn't just an accident," she murmured under her breath as she cleaned the wound. Daniel nodded grimly. "I know." Hours later, the storm outside calmed, but the storm in that living room had just begun. The woman finally stirred near midnight, panic surging through her as she tried to sit up, only to find Daniel sitting nearby, keeping watch like a silent guardian. "You're safe," he told her firmly. "No one knows you're here." Tears slid down her face again, but this time they weren't only from pain. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice fragile. Daniel looked toward the hallway where Lily slept and answered honestly. "Because if that was my daughter one day, I'd pray someone would." That was the moment something shifted in her expression. A flicker of hope piercing through fear. She told him her name was Ava. She didn't share much else that night, only that she had nowhere to go and that going back wasn't an option. Daniel didn't press. He made tea, adjusted the blanket around her, and sat back down, prepared to stay awake until sunrise if he had to. But he didn't know that the man she feared was already looking for her, that the black SUV had circled back twice before disappearing into the night. And he certainly didn't know that by choosing not to leave her alone. He had just stepped into a battle far bigger than he imagined. If you're feeling the tension rising already, make sure you subscribe to this channel because this story is only getting started, and what Daniel does next will leave you speechless. By morning, the quiet peace of Daniel's farmhouse felt deceptively normal, sunlight pouring through the curtains as Lily padded into the living room, unaware that a stranger's life was unraveling on their couch. But children notice more than adults think, and Lily paused when she saw Ava sitting upright, pale but awake, her ankle wrapped and her eyes uncertain. Instead of fear, Lily offered a small smile. "Daddy says heroes don't always wear capes," she said innocently, climbing onto Daniel's lap. Ava's lips trembled at the word hero, because she didn't feel rescued. She felt hunted. Over breakfast, fragments of the truth began to surface. Ava had been in a relationship that started charming and ended controlling. The bruises weren't new. They were simply the first ones she couldn't hide. The SUV belonged to Marcus, a man respected in town, wealthy, influential, and dangerously good at manipulating narratives. The previous night, she had finally tried to leave for good. He didn't take it well. Daniel listened quietly, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't afraid either. "He won't touch you here," he said firmly, though even as he spoke, a black SUV rolled slowly past the end of his gravel driveway. Ava saw it through the window and froze. Daniel saw it too. In that split second, instinct took over. He grabbed his phone and began recording, stepping outside calmly as if greeting a casual visitor. The SUV idled. The tinted window lowered slightly, revealing Marcus's cold stare. "You're harboring something that belongs to me," Marcus said smoothly. Daniel didn't flinch. People aren't property. The air between them tightened. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know what you're getting involved in." Daniel held up his phone slightly, not threatening, just visible. "I know enough." The SUV drove off, but not before Daniel captured the license plate and the threat. Inside, Ava was shaking. "He always wins," she whispered. That was when Daniel did something truly heroic. Not dramatic, not violent, but strategic. Instead of confronting Marcus alone, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. His late wife's cousin, a journalist known for exposing corruption and abuse cases others were too afraid to touch. By afternoon, statements were documented, photos of injuries were time-stamped, and neighbors had been quietly asked about what they'd seen in recent months. Turned out Ava wasn't the only one. 2 other women had stories, but they had been too scared to speak. Until now, Daniel's home became more than a shelter. It became a turning point. When Marcus returned that evening, this time with threats louder and more aggressive, he didn't expect flashing cameras at the edge of the property or a patrol car parked discreetly down the road. The confident smirk slipped from his face for the first time. Ava stood beside Daniel on the porch, her fear still present but no longer paralyzing. "I'm not property," she said clearly, her voice carrying further than she expected. Marcus realized the narrative was no longer his to control. Within weeks, investigations unfolded, reputations cracked, and the truth clawed its way into daylight. It wasn't easy. There were rumors, whispers, attempts to intimidate, but Daniel never backed down. Not because he was fearless, but because he knew what silence cost. And in protecting Ava, he showed Lily something more powerful than any lesson he could have spoken. That courage isn't loud, it's steady. Months later, Ava returned to the farmhouse one afternoon. Not broken, not hunted, but rebuilding. She had found work, counseling, and strength she didn't know she had. She thanked Daniel, but he shook his head. "You saved yourself," he told her. "I just refused to leave." The story didn't end with romance or dramatic declarations. It ended with dignity, safety, and a reminder that sometimes the most heroic act is simply staying when someone begs you to leave because they believe they're not worth saving. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage still exists in ordinary people, then make sure you subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that inspire, protect, and ignite hope. Because the next story might just change the way you see the world.